All right, we can go ahead and get started. So I posted the midterm, so that's like in 2 weeks. Yay. So there's a little description here. Um, it's gonna be a practical, so I'll just give you something to build and you'll just build it in class within those 2.5 hours. The one thing that will differ is I'm gonna give you a new database, so it's not gonna be the one that you've been using for homework. And so what I highly recommend is everybody create an installation, before the midterm. Test it out with the database we've been using just to kind of, make sure it's like connected properly, and also deploy it to Heroku, because to submit it, you'll also submit, just like with assignments, the GitHub repo and the Heroku URL, so we can see it live. And then I'll just give you a database to swap out right here. So it'll just be, replace it. Yes.
I remember there's a lot of like configuration that you had to do.
Yeah, so it'd be good to revisit that. So you have 2 weeks to figure it out. You can stick around in lab and just do it. But yeah, just highly recommend doing it instead of like the day of, because one, the configurations, if you forgot them or whatever, like, it could be another thing to think about. And then sometimes, like last semester, I had a midterm for a front-end project, a front-end class, and like pulling this stuff down, for whatever reason, it wasn't pulling down correctly. So you just want to ideally install everything this way. Like the composer install will install like all the Laravel like libraries and stuff. So this way you have it running before you get to class. Oh, and then in terms of like what you can use, you can look up anything on the internet. You can use your assignments. The only thing you just can't do is just talk to people in class, or even talk to people outside of class. Is there any questions on that? Okay, so today we're going to look at 3 different topics. We're going to look at middleware, authentication, and migrations. And so we're going to just build an auth system. So in previous classes, you may have like taken ITP 300. You did like a basic authentication system, but there's probably like little loopholes in there that wasn't like fully secure. So we're going to learn a little bit about the classes that come with Laravel to create an authentication system. Migrations are a way to update a database through our PHP code. So we'll get into that too, because we're gonna update that SQLite database that we've been using to add a users table. So because it doesn't already have one, and then we'll learn about middleware in the process too. So if you actually click on this link to like authentication, it takes you to the Laravel docs, and there's an artisan command that will like scaffold out an entire authentication system for you. So you do PHP artisan make auth, and it'll just scaffold out a lot of stuff for you. And if I were starting a project, I'd probably go this route too. But we're not going to do that today, because I think it's a better learning exercise to like just learn the process of building an authentication system, and then this way, if you need to deviate from like what they gave you through this command, then you just know how to just do it relatively from scratch, just using like the base classes that Laravel gives you. So, yeah. Okay, so if you want to open up that repository that we've been using in class, okay. So I'll go ahead and open that up with Atom. Now the first thing that we need to do is create a users table, because this is going to store a username or an email, a password, and the password is going to be encrypted. So instead of like plain text, if you ever heard of like, maybe in your first attempt to like build authentication, you stored the password in plain text. Generally, just a bad practice. You want to like encrypt it in case you've probably gotten emails that said our database was compromised. Now we have your password. Like, please change it. So you want to avoid those types of situations. So yeah, so we're going to create a table. And so we could do this directly in SQLite. Like we could go, open up the SQLite command and start doing create table and all that kind of stuff. But we can actually do this through something called migrations. And this is, not Laravel specific. You'll see this in other frameworks as well. But it's a way to like make modifications to our database, like adding columns, removing columns, and creating tables and all that kind of stuff through our PHP code. And the advantage to that is it's almost like version control for your database. Like you can easily like add a column, but if I want to roll back that change, I can through a command like roll back those changes I made to the database. So we're gonna create a migration, and we can do that through this artisan command. We can say php artisan make migration, and typically it'll follow like convention like create users table or add enabled to column to some table or something like that, right? So it's kind of very descriptive. So what we're doing is we're creating a users table. So I'll just call this create users table. So if we look at our project in this database folder, there's this migrations file. And then there's this create users table. Now, if you kind of look a little bit above it, there's also another create users table, and this just came with the framework. We're actually just going to delete both of these migrations just because the one that we just created will conflict with the one that came with the Laravel installation. This is mostly useful if you're kind of following that default like authentication scaffolding command. So we'll just delete these two. And so now we just have this one file. And so there's these two different methods in this class. And so the up one is for when we want to add things or when we're making modifications to the database. And then the down function is for when we want to kind of roll back the changes that were applied. Okay, so for our table, we're going to have a few different columns. We're going to have the ID, which is the primary key. We're also going to add a string, and this is going to be the email. So we can say table, arrow, string, and then the column name, which is email. And then we can also say table, arrow, string, password. Now there also has to be this like remember token column, and there's a special function for this, so it's just remember token. And by the way, like these things are all documented in this migrations link that I posted, which points to the Laravel docs. Yes. Now there's a few like different constraints we can actually apply to these things. So one thing we might want to do is we want our email to be unique. So we could say arrow unique. And maybe something else we want to do is we want to make the password, it's a required field, so it's not null. So we can say nullable false. So this up function will essentially, create this users table and add all these columns to it. So if we were to run this migration, it would do this. But then we could also say, hey, let's roll back, and then this will essentially delete the users table if we wanted to. Generally, it's one of those things like I rarely use like the rollback, but it's there. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this now. So in order to add this to the database, we can say php artisan migrate. Yes.
If we kept the old file, would it ask you to choose which one? Or
Yeah, so delete the other files because they kind of conflicted.
So if you does it just do it for any files that are in folders? It just changes.
Yeah. So if I had multiple migration files in here, it would go through all the ones that haven't been run.
how do you specify specific migration?
I'm not sure. Usually it just goes through all the ones that haven't been run. So
okay.
yeah. So I don't know if there's a way to say only run this one. Yeah, it's just all the ones that haven't been run. So now if I drop into like SQLite and I say SQLite database / database SQLite, so we'll just open it up through the command line and we could say dot tables. We can see here's this users table. There's also a command that I put on this SQLite cheat sheet. It's right here. So if I want to just kind of spit out all the columns and information about a table, I can say users. And we could say these were the like the columns that were created. I'm going to open up another tab because I'm going to keep this SQLite database open so we can like do select statements and stuff and see like the encrypted password. So I'll leave this here. Okay, so let's kind of go to another terminal window, and then we'll run php artisan serve. And we'll start this up. Then we'll browse to localhost 8000. Okay, so let's make a sign up route. I think that's the first thing we should probably do is make it so that users can sign up for the site, add in their email, store their password, that whole thing. So if we open up the web.php file, and if you want to like do the keyboard shortcut, at least on the Mac, it's Command P. I think on Windows it might be Control P if you're using Atom. So that'll do this, and you can kind of like quickly get to files. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need is a page that displays a form for the user to sign up. So we're going to say route get sign up. And we'll have some kind of controller. Maybe it's called sign up controller. And this is where I'm going to kind of maybe break away from the conventions a little bit from like when I'm creating, updating, and deleting things, just because sign up is sort of like a slightly different route. So I'll say sign up controller, and we'll say the index method. This will be the thing that returns a view that shows a form. And then corresponding, we'll have the post route. So we'll have, So we'll say post sign up, and this will be the one for processing a user so they can store them into the users table and then redirect them somewhere. So we'll say sign up controller at, maybe we'll just call it sign up. Okay, so let's go ahead and make this sign up controller. So I'll go to command line and I'll open up another tab and I'll say PHP artisan make controller and then give it the controller class name. So if we can go inside app, HTTP controllers, we can see our new sign up controller. So let's define these two methods, the index and then the sign up method. So I'll say public function index. And we'll also do public function sign up. So the first one, the index, will just simply return a view. We can call this sign up. So let's go ahead and create that view. So we'll go to the, I'll collapse this folder. We'll go to resources, views, it's a new file. We'll call this signup.blade.php. All right, so instead of me like typing out all the HTML, I'm just gonna grab it from when I did it yesterday and then paste it, and then I'll paste it to everybody just because it's kind of tedious. I think this is where I put it. Or let's see. Oh, no, this one. Okay, so I pasted in Slack inside the class demos channel. And this looks just like all the other views we've done where we have the layout, we're saying extend that layout, we're going to put in the title, so a unique title for this page. Everything else is just a form that leverages the Bootstrap classes and markup just to make it look somewhat presentable. And then there's that CSRF, cross-site request forgery. I think they call them directives in Blade, but this thing to put that hidden input so that it has that token. So any questions on this? I also put it like a link so to log in, which we'll eventually create. So we have two inputs, the email, the password, which is type password, a submit button, and that's really it. So now if we go to our app and just navigate to /signup, hopefully you see a form like this. Okay, so if I submit, it's going to do the process. So it's going to do that post request to /signup that we defined in our route. So it's going to hit this, but the method is empty right now. So if we look at it, it's empty, and that's why you get a blank page. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a new user and then save it to the database. And this will kind of collect that username and password or email and password and store it. So Laravel already comes with, so we could use like the DB query builder, but it actually already comes with this user model. And this is an Eloquent model, so we can actually just leverage Eloquent, and we don't actually even have to create the model just because the app came with it installed already. There's some extra things in here, and most of this is for like, I think if you're leveraging that command for creating the auth and scaffolding it out, but since we're doing it sort of, a little bit by hand, it won't get in the way. Okay, so we're going to say user is equal to new user. And the user was in the namespace app, so app user, just like all of our other Eloquent models. So we can say use app/user. So we have to and then we can say user.email is equal to request email. So we're going to capture that field from our sign-up form with the name of email. So name is equal to email, and name is equal to password. We're collecting these two values. I forget, did I go over this function? I did? Okay, because there's a couple ways to like collect information from a request. This is using like a global request function. Sometimes you can pull it off an object that you pass into a method. That's like another way of doing it. There's no right or wrong way. There's just multiple approaches. Yeah, you can do that too. Yeah. I think there's just a few different ways to do it. Yeah. I think like if we were getting into like unit testing and stuff, and you want to fake out the request, that's when passing it in through here becomes a little bit easier, because then you have something to pass in, whereas it's hard to fake it out through this global function. But other than that, then I think for simplicity, and this is probably the easier way. Okay, so we're going to set the email. Then we're also going to set the password. Now, instead of setting it to like the raw value, which would be request password, that'd be no good just because it wouldn't get encrypted. So what we can actually do is leverage a class called hash. And we can say hash make, and then just pass in the value. And this will create a one-way encrypted value of this. There's a few different like encryption techniques people use, and so this one's called bcrypt. There's another one called like SHA-1, SHA something, MD5. I forget. I could be. I vaguely remember, but like the details behind this, I think if like it gets slower and slower as you try and test a password multiple times. I forget exactly how it works, but you can look it up. But it's a pretty secure like way of encrypting it. So what we're essentially doing is taking the password and encrypting it and then storing it in the users table. And then when somebody tries to log in, we're going to take the password that they use to try and log in, encrypt that, and then compare their two encrypted ones. So even though it's like one-way encrypted, we don't need to decrypt it because we're just comparing like the two encrypted values, and those should be the same.
Is it decryptable or supposedly not?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe if you really tried. I know with like certain algorithms like MD5, they had these things like rainbow tables, and so people would just like, take a bunch of passwords, like common passwords, and then MD5 them or encrypt them, and then you could say, then you can kind of do the reverse lookup but you'd have to like run through all these tables, right? Whereas this, I think with bcrypt, if I remember it correctly, it was like keep trying to over and over, it gets slower and slower. And And so that's what makes it like it would take a really long time in order to like decrypt it, something like that. But yeah, Finn, do you do you remember otherwise?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say like sometimes the hash functions will have vulnerabilities that you can actually get some information about the original password, and sometimes for very commonly used stuff, people will have just built up huge tables of hashes, or if they're vulnerable, they can generate tables of some like intermediate stage to make it fast to crack. But barring that, there's nothing you can do but just trial and error, and if it's strong enough, that's basically possible.
Yeah.
When there's a kerfuffle about like passwords, a password database breach or something, it's usually because they were using like MD5, which has vulnerabilities, so people can actually retrieve the passwords from the hashes.
Yeah, so it's usually like really outdated code, or just really old, or they didn't know or something. Whereas if you go with the framework, right, like this is the conventional framework way, and they kind of like nudge you in the right direction already. Okay, so once we set these properties, we can call save, and this will do the insert into the database. And then maybe something that we do is let's redirect somewhere. We'll say let's redirect to a login page so they can log in. We'll come back to this in a little bit. Okay, so we'll go back to our web PHP, and let's create that login route. So we'll say route get /login, and okay, we can call this login controller, and we'll have the index method that'll return a form for us to log in. So let's just kind of like define out all the routes. So we're going to have the get /login to display the form. Then we'll also have the post to login, and this will actually do the verification to see if the credentials are correct. If they're correct, log the user in. If not, go back to the login page. So this will be login controller at login. So let's create this login controller. So we'll go back to our command line. And we'll do PHP artisan make controller login controller. So I'll open up that login controller file. So we'll create these two functions. We'll have the index one, which will show the login form. And then we'll also have that function called login, which will actually do the verification. So this index one will return a view, and we'll just call this login. So let's go to the views folder and create the login view. So we'll say login.blade.php. So I'm going to copy this view as well so we don't have to type it out. So this one's actually pretty similar to the sign up. It's almost the exact same. The only thing different is like the value login. Now there's like ways you could abstract all this and stuff, but for simplicity, we'll just copy it and I'll paste it in here. Okay, so if we navigate to login, we should see a form. Okay, so let's actually sign up, because now we got the part where when we sign up, we insert. Let's see, where is it? Okay, so we go to the sign up page, it returns the view. When we process the sign up page, we create a new user, we encrypt the password, we store it in the database, then we redirect back to login. And so at that point, we should see something. So let's go ahead and create a user. Oh, okay. Class app HTTP controllers hash not found. Okay, so hash is also another one of those things that's like global, so you can say use hash at the top. Okay, so if I do sign up, I got redirected, so it looks like it's okay. So if I hop into SQLite and I say select star from users, you can see here's the all the data. So you can see like here's this crazy password here, but it got encrypted. Okay, so now let's go back to our login controller and fill in this login function. So this is the part where we'll check to see if the credentials or the email and password that the user had submitted are valid. Okay, so there's a really nice class built into Laravel called auth, and there's a method on there called attempt. And we can pass it the information. And so here we can say email, arrow, and then grab from the request the email, so that email input. And then we can also grab the password. Grab that from the request. We'll say password. And then behind the scenes, this auth class knows to check these two, and it knows to hash this. So it's going to like take the password that was that the user submitted, encrypt it, and then compare that encrypted value against what's in the database. So maybe if you had kind of done this in raw PHP, like in the previous class, you probably had to do that comparison yourself. Now it's sort of abstracted away into this single attempt function. And this will return true or false. Yes?
I think there may have been issues by migration because it is saying that email does not exist as a column.
Okay, so in SQLite, if you run, well, first I guess you could say like dot tables, and do you see a users table? You see that? Oh, okay. And then the next thing you could do is run this. Pragma table info users. And this will spit out like all the columns. So ID, email, password. So do you see this? You see that? Okay, you don't have email, password, remember token. So okay, go back to your database migrations and this migration, and did you delete all the other files in there? Okay, and then you still have yours, and then in yours you have this, like all of this, and is it saved? And you and then did you also run PHP artisan migrate? So PHP artisan migrate like that, and then those changes should take effect. Oh yeah, PHP artisan migrate. You might have to delete the table and then try it again. Yeah, if you go inside SQLite, you can do like drop table users. That'll delete it and then try it again. Okay, so this auth attempt, it'll check these credentials, and this will return true or false. So we can capture this in a variable. I like to call it login was successful. So then this way I can say, if the login was successful, do one thing, otherwise do something else. So our code here looks like very readable. That's at least in terms of like variable naming. Just one of those things I like to do, so it's easier to come back to. Okay, so the event that the login was not successful, this else block will get executed, and we could say return redirect back to login. And if it was successful, we can say let's redirect to /profile. And we'll create this profile page, and this will like display our email. So this attempt will check to see if the credentials are valid, and then if they are valid, also maintain the logged in user in a session. So all those like session functions you probably had to use in previous classes, like you don't even have to worry about that. It kind of does this under the hood. Okay, so let's create this profile so that we can test this out to make sure it works. So I'll say route : get /profile. Okay, let's create a controller. We'll call this admin controller. And we'll call this index. And this route will just be to load up a view that extends the right layouts and stuff, and we'll just kind of throw the user's email on the page. Okay, so we need to create this controller. So we'll go back to our command line, and we'll say PHP artisan make controller, and then the admin controller. So if we open up admin controller, we name that function index. So I'll create that index function inside admin controller. So I'll say public function index. And this will return a view. Maybe we'll create like in our views folder, we'll have an admin folder and one called profile. Okay, so kind of like with other database queries, we could capture data and then pass it through the view through that second argument as an array, right? So if on a profile page, I would ideally, I would want the user, right? So I could pass in the user, but I need the user somehow. So how do I get this user? Well, it turns out when I log in with that auth class, it actually stores the current user in the session, and then it keeps it on a property called user. So we can say auth : user. So if you want the current logged in user anywhere in your app, you can just say auth : user. And then in this controller, because we're in a different namespace, we need to say use auth. There's also another one of these like global classes. So let's create this blade template, so the admin/profile. So if I go inside resources, views, we have one folder for playlist. I'll create another folder called admin. And then inside there, I'll create that new file called profile.blade.php. Now I'm going to copy this template too, just because it's also a little tedious, and it's mostly HTML. And you can see in this template, oh, I need to paste it in here. So this template extends the same layout like all the other ones. We set the title, the profile. You can call it really whatever you want. And then in our main section, we're going to say welcome back. And then because in our admin controller, we pass the current logged in user under the key user, we can say user arrow name. Well, I don't think we actually had a name property. So we can just say, maybe we can get rid of this. I think in my previous iteration I did that. So let's actually just delete this. So we'll say user arrow email. But if you wanted to, like in that users table, you can add a name column, like during the sign up process or something, and then show it there. Okay, so now I think at this point we're kind of ready to try this out. So we already created that user through the sign up. Now let's try logging in. So take your same credentials. If I hit login, okay, so let's see, auth. Oh, okay, so inside the login controller, I forgot to use the use auth. So whenever you see this error like class not found, it's probably because you forgot like a use statement, which I did. So yep. So here I'm going to say use auth. So we're using it down here. So we'll try that again. Cool. So now we get redirected to our profile page. Redirect or refresh, it's still maintained through the session.
You might go into your
Login controller. Oh, let's see. Yeah, the use auth. Oh, okay. And actually, now that I look at it, the template isn't like the nav, or let's see, was there a nav? I forget. Let me check. Oh no, this looks okay. Okay. Okay, so let's add a navigation to our page. So a navigation is a global element, so where do you think it goes? Yeah, in the layout. Did we? I didn't have one in my local project, so. Oh, okay. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to open up the layout. All right, so here's some like general bootstrap stuff. So I'll say nav. All right, so what I want to do is I want to have a link to log out. So I'll say log out, and we'll put the text log out. And while we're at it, you know what? Let's okay, so I think these things need some extra classes. So class is equal to nav item, and then the class on the anchor is nav link. Okay, so I'm going to copy this, and we're going to have one for login and log out. And maybe what we also do is let's throw one for sign up. So slash sign up. Okay, so we'll refresh. We have a little navigation. Now, if I click on this logout, it doesn't really go anywhere because I don't think we even defined it, so we get the 404 page. So let's go ahead and define this route so we can, log a user out. So we'll go back to our web PHP and we'll define a route to /logout. So I'll create this route, : get /logout. And we could maybe just leverage the logging controller. So we'll say login controller at logout instead of creating a controller just to log out. Okay, so I'll go to the login controller and we'll add another method. So we'll say public function logout. And logging out is, so if you're doing like this in plain PHP, you probably like destroyed the session, right? Which kind of erased it so it doesn't get maintained for this current session. So I think it was something like, session destroy or something like that. So what we can do inside Laravel is we can use this same auth class and just call logout. This will destroy the session, and then at this point we could redirect to maybe go back to the login page. So you can kind of see like this one class that they gave you, it's very useful. They do all the like session work and stuff under the hood, and you just have to like wire up the templates and the pieces together. But then somebody even not familiar with PHP could probably read this and they could say it looks pretty understandable. There aren't like too many details going on.
Is the logout for the route, is it a post or
Get. Yeah, so we'll just do like a get, which will go here and just do a redirect. Okay, so right now I'm on this profile page. If I hit log out, I should get redirected to login, which is cool. And so now if I go back to /profile, you can see that we get an error because it's saying trying to get property email off non-object. So remember when we did like user arrow email? That's why, because the session has been destroyed, so that user doesn't exist anymore. Yes.
But if you hit the back button, it's still
You get back to login. But yeah, this should error. Unless some browser's like doing some caching or something. I don't.
yeah. So I go back, it still shows.
If you do a refresh, does it still show up? So you're calling logout, and then
Yeah. I mean, if it goes back to the login page, I'm assuming login out.
guess we can look at it later.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to address this a little bit later because obviously a nav that says login, logout, and sign up doesn't. Some of these links don't always make sense. Like I'm currently logged out right now, so it doesn't make sense to show the user like a logout link. We'll get to that in a little bit. But the main thing I want to address is like kind of the core of this is, right, I have this profile page and I can still sort of access it, right? It's still processing it. It just happens to error out. And I want this maybe to, to be protected by login. So how do we protect this? So this is where we can use something called middleware. So middleware are like functions that execute before the route is finally hit. So if we look at this web where we define all of our routes, we can define middleware and say, and these are basically functions that will execute before these controllers get hit. And so you can do things like check to see if the users log in. If they are, let the request continue and go through. If not, we'll kind of throw them to a login page. Other uses for middleware for like if a site wants to go into maintenance mode, then you can, you want to, temporarily take the site down. You can kind of redirect every single request to a maintenance mode page and then put it back up later. So it's just, think of it just like functions that execute before the controller. Okay, so how do we make middleware? So we can actually do this through the artisan command line. So we can say php artisan make middleware. And I'm going to call this one, let's see, authenticated. Okay, so this middleware got created inside the HTTP folder, so pretty close to the controllers folder. And so we have this authenticated middleware. There's also one called authenticating that's also kind of goes with like the default authentication scaffolding that we're not using. So we're just kind of like hand rolling our own, but doing something similar. Okay, so if we look at this class, what this next request is doing is saying, let the request kind of go through. So let it continue. But we can add a guard here to say, hey, is the user authenticated for this profile page? If so, cool, let the request go through, which is essentially this. If not, we'll kind of redirect them somewhere else. So in here we can say if. There's also another method on the auth class called check, and this will return true or false. So we can say, let's check to see if the user is, if there's, authentication. If so, we'll let the request go through. Otherwise, we can say return redirect /login. And we need to use the auth class because we're using it down here. So we'll say up here, use auth. And that's really there. That's it to this little middleware function. So this is like a little guard that we could actually throw in the controller of like the admin controller, for example. But anyone could think of like any drawbacks to doing that? Throw it in there. Yeah. So if we can kind of abstract that out and say, hey, let's put this in this other function and then tie different controllers to this, then it's sort of separated and just gets a little bit easier to maintain. Okay, so if we look at this middleware, the full namespace of this is app HTTP middleware, and then the class would be authenticated. So inside this web PHP file, let's say I want to attach the profile route and make this authenticated. We can easily do this by saying route : middleware, and we can pass it an array of middleware functions. So in this case, we called ours authenticated. Now this doesn't correspond to the class name. This is going to be like a configuration thing we do in a minute. So let's come back to this, but we're essentially, we're going to say, okay, this will map to this, and let's run this handle function on this authenticated class before the route. So we can say, we're going to create like what's called a group. So we can say, let's group a bunch of routes together, and they all have to go through this authenticated middleware. So here we'll pass in a function, and then move this profile route into here. So if we want to add more routes and say, hey, we want these routes to be authenticated, you can just add them into this like group section, which makes it really readable because somebody coming into your app and you just want to get an idea of like what are all the routes and which ones are authenticated. Like you can easily see this right here. Whereas if that kind of like authentication logic was inside like the admin controller, it wouldn't be so obvious. Okay, so what is this authenticated key? So we need to, this is essentially like a name for this class, but we haven't configured that anywhere. And the way we do this is inside this kernel file. So inside this HTTP folder, there's this kernel. Okay, so there's a lot of different like middleware configurations in here, but the one that we're going to do is add it to this protected route middleware right here on line 53. So in here, this is where we're going to create that name called, wait, what was it called? Authenticated. And then we'll pass it the full middleware class name, which is actually the same thing as the first one up here. It's just we called it authenticated. So just add a D in there. So we're saying use this class, and this will have its name called authenticated. And then that's all we have to do. So when a request comes into profile, it will look this authenticated key up in the kernel, see this class, go to the authenticated class, and automatically call the handle function. So every single piece of middleware actually has a function called handle. If we look at some of these other ones, like there's actually one called maintenance mode, that comes for free with Laravel. I think they abstracted it out, but let's see. Some of these, okay, if we look at redirect if authenticated, there's also a handle. So they all just have to have like a handle function. So right now, if I just, okay, so currently I'm logged out. So if I navigate to profile, I get redirected back to login. So I've protected the profile page now. Okay, so I have a few other like routes and stuff in my app. So I think there's like a playlist route and an invoices route. So I think if I go to playlists, right, so there's like a playlist thing. So it might be a good idea to say like, okay, invoices should be in the admin route. Like that's not like really a public thing. So let's move that out and then put that inside this authenticated group. So I actually made the invoices controller at the home page. So we're just gonna like swap these two. We're gonna say, let's make the playlist page / and then we'll change this to invoices. And then I'm gonna move this into the group. This is mostly just to show like you can have multiple routes in here. Now I probably broke some links in here because I think if I go to, I'm gonna close some of these files. Okay, so if I go to invoices controller, oh, it might actually work okay. Okay, so looks like that's cool. If I go to invoices, okay, so looks like it's working. Any questions? Okay, so let me log in. So if I hit login, I'm on my profile page, and if I just manually go into invoices in the URL, I can see it. Let's actually maybe go to the layout page and throw that in there. So we'll go to layout, and we'll put a link to invoices. Okay, so right now I'm currently logged in. So I can log out, and when I'm logged in, I kind of don't want to show the login and the sign up URL because it's sort of irrelevant at this point. And in the reverse, when I'm logged out, I don't want to show the invoices and the logout links. So how can we do this? So inside of our nav, we can just use the blade directive, and we can actually just access auth directly. So we can say if auth : check, we'll do one thing, else we'll do something else, and then we'll end the if. So now we can just kind of cut and paste each one of these links and put it in the corresponding section. So when I'm logged in, this part of the if statement will execute. So I want to show the invoices and the logout links. And then if I'm not logged in, I want to show these other two links. So the login and sign up. And it might actually make sense to throw a link to the profile page inside of here. Otherwise, it's sort of unknown. So I'll just copy this and we'll say /profile. So we have our three logged in links, and then the links for when you're logged out. Okay, so refresh. I can go to the profile page. I'm logged in. I can go back to the invoices page. Cool. Now if I do log out, I get redirected back to the login page. I see the login and log out. You can log back in. You can say so. Looks good. Yes.
Could you have a layout file?
Sure. Okay, so one last thing to make this a little bit better. So right now, if I sign up, I get redirected back to the login page, right? And then I have to retype in my credentials. That's kind of annoying, isn't it? It would be a lot nicer if when I sign up, I get logged in automatically. And so how can we do that? So if you go back to the sign up controller, so right here, once we create the user, they get created, but we don't get logged in, and then we just go back to the login page, and they just have to retype it out. So the auth class also has something to say, let's take a user and log them in, and this will put them in the session. So we don't have to do anything. So at the top, we'll say use auth. And then from the auth class, I can say log in, and I can pass it the user. So say, let's log in this user, and then we'll return redirect to / maybe the profile page. And then we can comment out this piece. So just, slightly better user experience. And we can go back and try this. So we'll go to sign up. And we get redirected back to the profile page. So I can log out. And if I try and do profile, we get redirected back so we can see the middleware taking effect. I can even kind of throw in bad credentials, right? And then if it's, you can add in extra validation and stuff in here to make it, to say if to show messages and all that. But, at its basic, this is how you can do auth. So these are all of our public routes, and then these are our authenticated routes. And so most of it was just kind of using just the auth class and this specific function. So One of them was auth attempt, so we can kind of give it like an email and password, and we can say, hey, try and find this user, and this will automatically encrypt this and check the the two encrypted passwords to see if there's a match. So there was auth attempt. There's auth logout to destroy a session. There's auth login to create a session. And then there's auth user to get the current user in the session. So 4 functions. And then I guess the other one was like the hash function to encrypt the password. Any questions? Yeah, another use of middleware in Laravel, you can say, let's see. Okay, so you can run PHP Artisan down to put the application into maintenance mode, and there's a corresponding up, so bring the application out of maintenance mode. And it's really cool actually, because then you could say like, so I can just go to my app and say like PHP Artisan down, and if I refresh, I think it redirects right, so it kind of gives you back like this kind of page. So we're doing some maintenance, please check back soon. And this is like for all routes, right? So you can easily log into your server, take it down for a moment, and then once you're done, go back and run PHP Artisan up, refresh, and it's all good again. Yes?
Try logging in and then maybe back. Or logging in, log out, and hit back.
Okay, so
That's what I was.
log in like this.
Yeah, and log out and hit the back.
I think that's just like browser cache,
Okay.
right? Because if I just do a refresh right there, it took me back to login. So I think that's just like the browser caching things. Yeah. Like I think if you go like on other sites and stuff and try that same thing, it'll probably happen too. Because I think I've sort of like seen that around.
Yeah, because instead of refreshing, if I do type in like profile, then it won't.
Yeah. So I think it's just like the cache browser.
There's no way around that.
Maybe closing the tab. Maybe there is. I don't know.
That's the same with your bank website.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to try that later, actually. I don't know. I'm gonna try it later now. Okay, so for the assignment, you're going to, instead of rebuilding an authentication, there's like only, one way to do it. So what you're going to do instead is you're going to write a piece of middleware. You're going to create a configurations table in your database, and you're going to do this using a migration. And so this will have 3 columns, so ID, a name, and then value. And then so in this table, you're going to have you're basically going to do maintenance mode, but without using PHP Artisan up and down. So it's just like, database driven. So in this maintenance column, like the name will be maintenance and the value will be the string on or off. And if it's on, you'll take users to a maintenance mode page. Otherwise, let the route continue. Then you'll also create like an admin page under /settings, and this will allow you to toggle this. Also, this maintenance mode is a little different because it's only going to apply to public routes. So all your public routes. So this means like even if the site is down, we can still go to like the settings page and toggle it, and then you can see it from there. Any questions? Yes.
So the maintenance mode is only, so it's only gonna like give that 503 if it's a public page, not for like the login page.
Yeah, just for the public pages. This way, like regardless, you can get through to the protected or the admin section and do things.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so for your project, if you're in, you can do auth like the way we did it in class today and just kind of like, hand roll it. If you want, you can also do it this way where you kind of leverage more of the scaffolding and then do adjustments as needed. So it's really up to you. I just wanted to kind of show you because underneath the hood, like this is doing something like what we did today, just maybe a little bit more sophisticated, just probably not even by like a whole lot, but you have like a good idea of like what's going on. So. Cool. If not, no questions. End it for today.